to talk about how to turn a fraction into a decimal. We've done this before. However, what we're going to see in our lesson today is that fractions sometimes result in a terminating decimal and sometimes it results in a repeating decimal. I'm going to explain to you what these are. You see up here in this chart that the example of a terminating decimal is a decimal that has a stopping point. It terminates, it ends. 0.3 is an example of a terminating decimal. If you were to write 3/10 as a decimal, as we know already, that's 0.3, and that's a terminating decimal. 4/5, if we were to divide 4 by 5, you know that it's going to end up with 0.8. 0.8 is what we call a terminating decimal. However, some fractions, when we divide, we keep on getting the same number over and over. This is called a repeating decimal. 5/6 is an example of a fraction that turns into a repeating decimal. When you divide 5 by 6, you'll see that the number gives you 0.83333. It keeps on going and going. This is called a repeating decimal. It does not terminate. It doesn't end. To indicate the number pattern that repeats indefinitely, you can use bar notation. Bar notation is a simple little bar placed over the digits that repeat. If you take a look at this decimal, 0.545454, since the 5 and the 4 keep repeating, you can just simply write 0.54 one time and then put a bar over the 5 and the 4, since those are the numbers that repeat. Take a look at this example, 0.58 and the 3 repeats, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. So instead of writing all those 3's, you can use bar notation, 0.58. In this example though, you see the bar is only over the 3 because only the 3 is repeating. The bar is not over the 5 and the 8. So let's take a look at an example that might give us a terminating, it's going to give us either a terminating or repeating decimal. If I were to write 5/12 as a decimal, I'm going to divide the numerator by the denominator, 5 by 12. So since 12 doesn't go into 5, I'm going to put a 0, I'm going to add a decimal point, add another 0, and I'm going to continue dividing. I'm now going to divide 12 into 50. 12 goes into 50 4 times. 4 times 12 is 48, with a remainder of 2. And as long as I keep getting a remainder, I'm going to keep adding zeros and dividing. I'm going to drop another 0 and divide 12 into 20. 12 goes into 20 one time, because 1 times 12 is 12. And that gives me a remainder of 8. Now I'm going to drop another 0. Anytime I keep getting a remainder, I'm going to drop a 0 and keep dividing. 12 goes into 80 6 times, because 6 times 12 is 72. And again, I'm going to get a remainder. My remainder is 8. You might notice something. When I drop a 0 here, my number 80 is the same as the remainder that I got last time. So 12 goes into 80, it's going to be a 6 again. And if I keep going, 6 times 12 is 72. And you might notice this pattern, 80, 72, 80, 72, which means that my quotient is going to continue to be 6. I'm going to continue to get 6. This is an example of a repeating decimal. I can divide and divide and divide, and I'm going to keep on getting 6. So at this point, I'm going to stop. I'm going to write all the numbers that don't repeat, and when I get to the number that does repeat, I'm going to put a bar over it. So 5/12 as a decimal is 0.416 repetitive. This 6 is repeating. Make sure you're taking some notes. In this example, we learned yesterday that there's a little trick for the ninths. Do you remember? Hopefully you've memorized that 1/9 is 0.111, on and on and on. 2/9 is 0.22222, and on and on. 3/9 is 0.33. 4/9 is 0.4 repetitive, 5/9 is 0.5 repetitive, and on and on. So in this example, I don't need to divide if I've memorized the ninths. So 2/9, as we just wrote here, is 0.222. So instead of writing the 2's and the dots, I'm going to now use bar notation. I'm going to put a bar over the 2 to show that it keeps repeating. This is also a negative, so I'm just going to pop in my negative. So negative 2/9 as a decimal is negative 0.2 with a bar on the top. Why don't you try a couple of these? I'd like you to try A, B, and why don't you try E here? Pause the video and we'll check them when you're finished. All right, I want to start with going over the easiest one. I hope that you noticed the ninths right there. And I hope you remembered the rule that any ninth is always going to repeat. 8/9 is 0.8888. So we put a bar, 0.8 repetitive. Let's take a look at 1/6. So I'm going to do 1 divided by 6, add a 0. 6 goes into 10 one time. The remainder 4, bring down a 0. 6 goes into 40 6 times because 6 times 6 is 36. And there I see where the repeating starts. If I were to drop another 0, did you notice 6 goes into 40 6 times again? It's going to repeat. So 1/6 is 0.16 repetitive. The bar should be over the 6. Let's take a look at 5/6. So I'm going to divide 5 by 6. 0.6 goes into 50 8 times. 6 times 8 is 48. Remainder 2. Bring down a 0. You should be checking your work now. 6 goes into 20 3 times because 3 times 6 is 18. And here it is again, the 2. The 2 is repeating. If I drop another 0, it's going to be 3 again. 6 goes into 20 3 times again. So negative 5/6 as a decimal is negative 0.83, and your bar should be over the 3. So writing a fraction as a decimal is pretty simple. Look for shortcuts. Look for ones you've memorized. If not, divide, and watch out for the repeating numbers. If you have a mixed number and you have to write that as a decimal, it's not any harder. You simply take the whole number and you write that first before you figure out what the fraction is going to be. So this would be negative 2 point, because that's negative 2 whole. And 2 wholes is in the position just to the left of the decimal point. We learned yesterday the shortcut for thirds. I wonder if you remember that 1/3 is 0.333 or 0.3 repetitive. If you know that, then you also might remember that 2/3 is 0.6 repetitive. So I don't have to divide on this one if I've memorized 2/3. So that's going to give me negative 2.3, oops, 2/3, not 1/3. So that should be negative 2.6 with a bar. 2.6 repetitive, negative 2.6 repetitive. So why don't you try this one right here. Pause the video and try C. Unpause it. Write 2 1/3 as a decimal. All right, let's take a look at how you did. Remember, this is a whole number, so we're just going to put that to the left of the decimal point. There's my decimal. And remember the thirds? We just talked about them. 1/3 is 0.333. You can check it out by dividing if you want. 1 divided by 3. But your answer should look like that. All right. I want to show you one more little hint when dividing, when turning a fraction into a decimal. Take a look at this real life example. Frankie made 34 out of 44 free throws this season. To the nearest thousandth, what is his free throw average? Now here it's showing us how to use a calculator. You can take note of that And you can try that at home if you have a chance. But I want to show you how to do it without a calculator. I know that 34 out of 44 can be written as a fraction. But before I start to divide that, those are some pretty big numbers. 34 divided by 44 is going to take me a minute to figure out. So there is a shortcut. Sometimes the fraction can be simplified. If you can simplify the fraction, the numbers get smaller. And if the numbers get smaller, they're easier to work with and divide. In this case, I can divide these by 2. And if I divide them by 2, I get 17 over 22. So when I go to divide, my numbers are just a little bit smaller. I get to do 17 divided by 22 instead of dividing by 44. So life gets a tiny bit easier. So I'm going to go ahead and do this division for you. I don't know my 22 times table, so remember we got to guess and check here. 22 doesn't go into 17. 22 into 170, that's going to be, looks like 8, probably 7 times. Let's guess and check. 22 times 7, that will give me 154. And yep, can't go in any more than that, so I'm going to check and see what my remainder is now. 170 minus 154. That gives me 16. I bring down another 0. You can also look for the little fact inside the big fact there. It's kind of like 2 into 16. So my guess would be 8. Although I see that that's a little bit bigger than 20. So I'm going to try, looks like it's going to be 7 again. 22 times 7 is 154. We already figured that out. That'll give me a remainder of 6. I bring down a 0. 22 goes into 60 only 2 times. 2 times 22 is 44. Move these numbers out of the way. And you notice I'm still going here. Kind of a long number. And if you want to pause for a minute and let's look back at the problem. It says to the nearest 1,000. And if you remember, the thousands place is where I am right now. Tenths, hundredths, thousands. So some people say, okay, you can stop now. But if I want to round to the nearest thousandth, then I need to divide to the 10,000ths place so that I know what my thousandths place rounds to. This is kind of tricky. So let me keep dividing here. If I subtract, see where I was, I get 16 again. Oh, I noticed that happened up there. And 22 goes into 160. We already did that. 7. So that tells me right there, tells me 2 things actually. Since I was just rounding to the nearest thousandths, I can take this number and use it to tell me whether I round the thousandths place up or down. And in this case, since this is more than 5, I'm going to round this up. So here it is. They already showed us the work. His free throw average would be 0.773. Okay? So that is an example of a real-life problem. Make life a little bit easier for us. Why don't you try this one, and we'll be finished for today. Anna made 15 strikes out of 55 balls rolled during a bowling contest. What is her strike average? So you're going to need to turn 15 over 55 into a decimal. Try that one. Unpause the video when you're finished. Okay, let's take a look at this one. I hope that you notice that you can make life a little bit easier by simplifying this fraction. Did you catch that? You can divide by 5. If I divide by 5 here, I'll get 3 11ths. And that makes my life quite a bit easier. So 3 divided by 11. 11 doesn't go into 3. 11 goes into 30 2 times. 2 times 11 is 22. Remainder 8. bring down a 0. 11 goes into 87 times, because 7 times 11 is 77. And remainder 3. And I want you to notice something. Did you see how I started out with 30 up there? And here it is repeating again. That should tell you something. Watch what happens. 11 goes into 30 2 times, because 2 times 11 is 22. You noticing anything? 30, 22, 30, 22. What's going to come next? You guessed it, the 80. It's going to repeat. The average is going to be 0.272727. It's not going to end. It's not going to terminate. So Anna's bowling average is 0.27 repetitive. We can write it like that, or we could round it to the nearest hundredth, in which case it would be 0.27. Read directions carefully on your homework to see if it's asking you to round or asking you to write your answer as a repeated decimal with bar notation. So a lot of new information today. Take your time, go back over the video if you have to. Make sure you write down the examples and you practice the problems you saw up there. And we will try this again tomorrow. See you then.